you doing?
Boker Tov.
Boker Tov, yeah. We've been up for a while.
It's nice to see you.
How you doing? Wow. We have to let people know that we actually know each other, right?
We do.
I've done my share of Nishma trips to California.
I'm Chana Gelb, and I am a psychologist. I live in Los Angeles, and I was lucky enough to meet Racheli many years ago already. I think Racheli came for a Nishmat Shabbaton, and it was wonderful to meet her then. And it's always we clicked. We went. Do you remember we went to the Getty? We went to the Getty Gardens. That was fun. That was fun. And now to talk about real life stuff together is a treat for me. So I'm excited for the next hour, Racheli.
Okay, so I'm Racheli, and I work for Nishmat as a Yoetz Halacha and as a teacher of Gemara and Halacha. I also work for Matan as a head of a Halacha program, and I live in Nofei Elon. Nofei Elon is actually Shalabim, and that means that we were all together with about 2,000 other people that came here to the main grass in Kibbutz Shalabim. We spent the evening in the funeral of Daniel Morris. And that's one of 45 funerals that took place over the last couple of days, Erev Shabbat and Sunday. And it's, you wake up in the morning and you smile, and then you slowly remember what's been going on here for the last 3 days. So that's difficult. And there's a very strong sense that people are not alone, that this has been crossing the Jewish world, and the grief and frustration and sorrow, and that people are at least, you can't change anything, but you can put your shoulder under it to help carry it, all of us together. So
this was a real trauma on top of the trauma of COVID, and it's as if we came out of one and we were ready to celebrate and be joyous, and this is a real trauma. And we know that with trauma, everyone reacts differently. Some people want to talk, some people it's hard to talk for them, and the main thing is really what you said, to be there for each other and to be supportive and just to be mindful. Some kids are going to want to talk in 3 months. Some people are going to want to talk tomorrow. And it was really a trauma for Am Yisrael, for parents, for kids, for communities. And
I actually realized that we were standing and the boys from the gap year programs from yeshivas all over the country, and the girls from the seminaries, they all came for whoever chose to come. Nobody was forced to come, but they were all given the opportunity to come to the funeral. And it was looking at these, 18-year-old Americans, mostly Americans, overseas students. And for the vast majority of them, it was the first funeral they ever attended in their life. And something nice about it, that not the occasion itself, but that you managed to get to 18 or 19 without attending a funeral. In Israel, it doesn't often happen, but it's also a very difficult experience, and these are very young people, and there's a lot of growing up to do. Growing up is not all bad. It's something the word growth is relevant there.
What would you say to the families of these students?
The ones that are, it's difficult to say something in a general sense. For me, it was reminiscent of two experiences. One was right there on that same grass with the same very, very large population was where Naftali's Levaya came from. So it was a little bit too much deja vu for comfort. But what I, much more than that, I felt was the experience of losing Ezra Schwartz. I think that must be 6 years ago. I hope I'm not mistaken. And maybe less.
Ezra Schwartz it was the student, I think.
Right, he was a student in Ashreinu, a one-year program in a yeshiva program in Israel, and it was a terror attack, unlike this time. But then I went to meet with his classmates in Ashreinu, and I remember speaking to them and realizing, how difficult this is, and how far into their life they're going to be carrying this experience. But also, after spending quite a while with them, taping this video for just like a WhatsApp message for their parents, saying, I met your kids. They're okay. They will be okay. They're going through something very difficult, but they're surrounded by so much staff, so many caring, wise people that are trying to help them go through whatever it is, and to the extent of their comfort level to speak and to share, and you can't promise anything to anybody, but for the most part, they'll be okay. They're resilient. They have strength. They have a whole lot of inner resources that come in at such situations. And I met them and I spent time with them so I could, calm their parents. These were 2,000 amazing people, out of which were a few hundred young students. I didn't speak to each of them personally, but I do know that they're surrounded by staff. They're not being left alone for a minute. They're processing. They're going. They like on the psychological level, on the spiritual level, and on the Torah level, and just the social level of speaking about things. So. As a psychologist, you should know nobody can promise anything, but really they stood there, they sang together, they had a community experience of strengthening each other. After all the eulogies, everybody was standing and singing and deriving strength from the group, from the nation, from the community. So I think they'll be okay.
Racheli, something that I've been struck about you ever since I met you was your hopefulness. And after the tragedy with your son Naftali was also your resilience. But I'm wondering, and I'm hearing it tonight also when we're talking about and again, that is the way of the Jewish people at our best. Not to say you don't have moments, and not to say that there aren't a lot of dark moments, but that really is one of the maybe touchstones of the Jewish people, to have hope. We always try to find hope, and I'm wondering if we speak to your own experience. What gave you that resilience? Was there anything specific in reflection? Something you're saying is the idea of going through something together, not being alone, which I think is a really important piece when we're going through trauma and talking about trauma, not being alone and going through something together and being safe to talk and feeling safe to talk. But I'm wondering if there's something specific about your experience.
So this is interesting. We didn't decide to speak about this. It's just
not at all. We'll get to the program.
No, we're fine. I mean, I'm just happy speaking to you. It's been a while, COVID and all. So one thing is, before I on a personal level, this year we lost Rabbi Zachs, and one of my favorite quotes from him is here. I wanted to read it for you, so it's where is this? Here it is. He says, when he talks about Chet HaMeraglim in Beshalach, he says, optimism is the belief that it will be all right. Yeah, like Israelis say, yeh beseder. It's like you get your Israeli passport, you're supposed to think that yeh beseder. And that might be a source of some of the tragedy that happened in Meron. But Rabbi Sachs says, optimism is the belief that it will be all right. Hope is the belief that together we can make it all right. A Jew who knows the history of his people cannot be an optimist. But a Jew worthy of the name Jew never abandons hope. The most pessimistic prophets from Amos to Yirmiyahu voiced also the voice of hope. The Meraglim, on the other hand, showed defeatism. Defeatism, you're like to be defeatism. Tvustanut, and failed as leaders and as Jews. To be a Jew is to be an agent of hope. So this sentence of isn't it amazing? I love that.
I love that. I wanted to bring up a little bit, pivoting a little bit to mental health, and zoom out of the weekend's events a little bit.
Yes, I'll just if you let me, I'll just. I like the differentiation between yeh beseder, optimism, and hope. It's the kind of thing that moves you to action and moves you to collaborate and makes you do things, and not just trust that things will be okay. And on the other hand, it's like the way he says, being a Jew is being an agent of hope. So that's a big deal. And just not to, it shouldn't seem like I'm running away from your question. A person can't testify for their own resources, but I could say that there was endless support and circles of support, and each circle had its own importance. Family was a major thing, and then community was a major thing, and then the wide circles. And a ton of other stuff, but now I'm back to, go ahead.
I think it's really interesting what we're talking about, that hope and simcha. Simcha is such a big thing in Judaism, mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha, and these really are real aspirations. And to do mitzvot b'simcha is a very high level, and yet we do have a greater understanding that mental health isn't as simple as hope and you'll get there, or try hard, or get support. So I want us to pivot to maybe the harder conversations a little bit. And it's true that we have a better understanding that mental health is a real issue. It's the same way that people are in pain physically. The Torah cares deeply about people's mental pain and suffering and addresses that in many ways. What I was thinking about lately is there was an article recently in Jewish Action that Rabbi Helfgott wrote about, and he chronicled his journey with depression. And we're more ready to talk about the struggles that people have, and yet we're still hesitant. We notice it in a community member, we see it in general. But when it comes to our family, we're a little bit more hesitant. This year during COVID, I thought there were a couple of really good examples of how mental health became a deciding factor in Halacha. And I wanted to talk about a couple of Piskei Halacha, not so much the content, because that's not my expertise, but more the messaging. Anecdotally, when I would speak to yoatzot and to psychiatrists and to rabbanim, many spoke about a greater use of halachically permissible birth control this year, given the fact that many families that would have chosen to try to have a child otherwise reported feeling very overwhelmed and unable to cope with the children at home and on Zoom and all the pressures. And this is anecdotal. The second example is the famous Pesach 2020, I call it, where there was an interesting article in the Lehr House that sort of summarized all the Pesach of Pesach 2020. And without quoting each one, because I leave that to the rabbis and the poskim, I want to say that the messaging was to take seriously that if someone's going to lose their mind for the Seder of 2020, when it was going to be a 3-day Chag, then maybe there were dispensations to allow technology in certain ways. And Rabbanim talked about how we're going to allow technology so someone wouldn't lose their minds. And I thought that was so interesting. People were taking seriously this idea that no one was in physical danger, but people's mental health were in danger of being alone for 3 days. This was back in the day when we didn't know what Corona really was. And we stayed 20 feet away from people with masks, and people had seders alone, and people were really isolated. And I'm wondering, what could you tell us about mental health being a factor in deciding halacha, and how mental health is used as a factor to improve people's lives and to alleviate the suffering and the anguish that some people experience, even if it's not pikuach nefesh? I feel like, the poskim were lenient in the sense, and again, I don't want to get into the content, but they were lenient in the sense of saying, even if someone's not going to technically lose their mind, which that's not a very psychological term, but if it might lead to that, we want to take that seriously. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts? What can you tell us about mental health as a deciding factor in halacha?
Let's see. So first of all, just, as on the sidelines of that Pesach 2020 discussion, that was interesting and varied, and there's a lot to say. I have a friend that has an elderly mother overseas in Europe, and Corona was very difficult because her whole family was here, and the community there was extremely isolated. To this day, they have closures at night, and very difficult situation. And every weekend, it would become even more tense because you call her before Shabbat, after Shabbat, but the 3-day Chag ended up being the time where she committed herself to a mental hospital during the after 48 hours, and that was the most healthy thing she could have done because she needed that help and that protection, and it's things became very, very complicated after that, but I heard people when analyzing this scenario of the Zooms or whatever, trying to kind of belittle or saying "Yeh beseder" on some of these cases, and it's true for most of the population. Most of us have resources. Most of us are resilient, but for the border cases, it could be totally a game changer. The extra 24 hours, because people are saying, well, we had Shabbatot all the time, and now came this in America, overseas it was a 3 day. Right, by us it was 48 hours, but by you it was 3 days, as was in France where this went on, and she ended up with a very, very, very long hospitalization in a mental facility, and sometimes you only need to know one case and understand how severe the situation is. And the problem is that we don't each have our own case, and some of this information has to be conveyed. Now, I have to also say the flip side. A lot of our elderly parents explicitly said, we're strong, we're okay, don't worry about us. We wouldn't dream to use anything that isn't strictly halachic, and honoring that inner will and this sense of resilience that our parents went through stuff. They weren't born yesterday, so that was also very important. But understanding that there's such a variety, and that people are made differently, and they're in different stages of their lives, and their fragility and vulnerability is different, and being prepared to meet that is a big deal. As far as mental health and halacha in general, it is a huge topic, and the thing is, you said, does someone use the code name pikuach nefesh? It's like I had this.
I want to like just say that if they would experience significant mental distress,
Right. So that's right. So that's the issue, because say, just for example, I speak to a young couple, and the young wife, first year of marriage, speaks in very, very, very extreme terms about the rejection and almost self-loathing that she feels when in times of nida, when they're not allowed to be physical with each other, and it was very, very obvious that mentally this is a big deal. But as someone that deals with halacha, I was listening in for these, will she hint that she's suicidal? Okay. Will she hint that she's endangering herself? And she was a very intelligent and young lady and knowledgeable. And we were very honest about that. And she said, no, I don't think I'm in such danger. I'm just in great distress. And a lot of the question is there. When people, they might be deteriorating a little bit. They might be in great tsar and great ogmat nefesh and great distress. But it doesn't press that red button of, pikuach nefesh, we can do anything.
Yeah.
And there it takes the flexibility and the awareness. And I must say, halacha doesn't have simple answers for that. It does have answers, but they're not simple. I'll say even one step before this. In cases where people do suffer from mental issues that are, say, diagnosed, okay? We're not talking about a general population and their mental health, but people that already have a diagnosis. Even not only the rabbinical world, the whole world has a difficult time dealing with it, because it's not written on their faces or on their sleeves. It's a pain and a form of suffering that's difficult to recognize and to empathize with, because you don't understand it, because it's not exposed. Sometimes we have the illusion that it has to do with people's choices and that they can control it. And though most of the time they can't, it's a disease like any other disease. It has a lot to do with shame and stigmatizing, and halacha and rabbis and the community are, just like the wider world, are really in trouble with that. It's so delicate to deal with. You want to say something?
I guess I was thinking that that's true in, let's say, extreme depression or extreme something that's diagnosable. But I think that there's been, at least in COVID, I think something that COVID has done is allowed us to say that maybe we're not all doing so well. Maybe we struggle in some ways and we're doing well in other ways. And I think that that's very freeing for people. And maybe I found that one thing that was different in COVID is that people were okay to say, I'm a little down. I have the COVID blues. I'm struggling a little bit. I feel lonely, in ways that people might not have felt okay to say that before. Beforehand, it was like, how are you? Good. And you, and here it was all of a sudden, you got the permission. You got the permission to say that not everything was perfect. And I found that was liberating for people. And it's almost a fear that when COVID's over, can we still talk about mental health? Can we still say that we struggle with our kids in some way, or we're struggling in some way? And I think what you're saying, when you talked about the story in France, the story with a young couple, was that really halacha, it's important to reflect on them, on the individuality of halachic decisions. There's not one size fits all, and that's what you're saying. But what I think we're saying now, when we shift to COVID a little bit, is that people need to be able to feel safe to communicate how they're feeling. If it might be invisible, it might be that they're really depressed. It might just be that they're struggling in some way, and to feel safe to communicate that effectively and clearly, to get help when they need it in extreme ways, and just to feel less alone. Kind of what you described about the levaya last night, to feel a little less alone when you can share something with someone else. And the shame in talking about it, I find that sometimes it becomes layered in someone's personality. A client will say to me, I think my daughter is no longer religious, or my daughter, I think, might be a lesbian, or I'm really struggling in my marriage, or my husband lost a job. And there's so much shame in talking about painful things because we think everything has to be rosy. And I think that what COVID did, I think one of the silver linings is allow for us to say, we do want to communicate, and we don't want to be alone in our pain. And maybe that will take away some of the shame. Being able to talk, being able to communicate, I think that will lift some of the shame.
It's interesting because, again, it's a very delicate dance between the things that are diagnosed, and then you have the set of tools, both medically and halachically, to deal with them, because they're, either they're pikuach nefesh, or they're even chole she'en bo sakana, someone that has a condition but it doesn't immediately endanger them. And we have a set of rules that has flexibility built into it to deal with it with someone. A person doesn't have to be suicidal to be depressed, and a person who's depressed, even if he's not in danger, we would describe him as chole she'en bo sakana, if it's en bo sakana, if he's in that stage. And we have halachic tools to meet them halfway. And then there is what you were talking about, the effect on the general population, and just healthy people that don't have ongoing mental issues, that are going through difficult things, and where do you meet that, and how do, again, for me it's fascinating from a halachic perspective. If something is just ogumat nefesh, meaning creates sorrow or distress, only ogumat nefesh, not other things. How does halacha relate to that? And there are places where you can see examples where definitely this issue of tsar, of distress, comes into consideration. I will say that, and I wonder what you think about this, that often the inability or hardship in seeking help, professional help, etc., is not just a side of, it's like another phenomena. Sometimes it's part of the problem itself, part of the something going on a mental health issue, and part of that same problem will be the refusal to recognize it, the refusal to seek help, and of course that makes things very, very complicated. Also, okay, maybe I'll hear what you have to say, and I'll see.
I think what you're saying is that people are sometimes resistant to acknowledging that there's a problem.
But that it comes as a package deal with the problem itself. It's not just, people have a hard time asking for help. No, it's with the mental condition that has been created, or that showed up now, or was exposed now, comes a phenomena that sometimes denies the problem, but also resists treatment.
It's layered. The more that the more the shame is layered in, the more we're less open to seeking help. I think that's true, but I don't think that's the whole story. I do think that there's a barrier in it being okay. If you define yourself as a generally okay person, and generally okay and thriving on the whole, and kids are in school and everyone's working, and a general part of the community, I think it's hard to sometimes say, I'm struggling in some area. And I think I've noticed in the people that I'm working with that COVID just allowed the language of mental health to be more accessible, and to say, maybe I felt isolated, maybe I felt fearful, maybe I felt good things during COVID. Maybe I liked, like, let's say even spiritual things during COVID. Maybe I liked not hosting. Maybe I liked davening at home. And when there was no shul, maybe I liked our family tefillah. Maybe there were some nice things, and just to sort of be more okay noticing what individually works for someone. I find that it's not so much that people are afraid, but people are always looking over their shoulders. Well, what is everyone else doing? What is everyone else seeing? And to say, this is what works for me. This doesn't work for me. I should get help. And acknowledging. I think one of the big keys is acknowledging when something's not okay and we want to get help and we need to get help. That's the beginning of
yeah. Again, it's interesting because on most fields, on most instances, I feel that the community is a tremendous help and a tremendous support. And yet when mental issues come up, I find that because the community is very homogeneous, it doesn't have a wide variety of characters in it. We feel like we're very varied, but actually we're quite similar to each other. Then if someone's dealing with something that seems, at least to them, all different, they feel totally out of place. And the community that was such a support and such help could be an extra difficulty. And on top of that these wonderful, wonderful, close-knit communities also don't enable a person to be anonymous, to now like lose themselves a little bit, disappear, not be in the front stage, because they're dealing with something and they just want some, and in these very, tend to be. And these are all wonderful qualities. We know each other, we care about each other, but sometimes it's also an extra difficulty.
Well, jumping ahead a little bit, sometimes these homogeneous communities, which really are so supportive and we need to go back to shul, and it's true. But sometimes the risk, let's talk about the benefits. We talked about the benefits, the support, the love, the compassion, the achdut. On the other hand, the risk factor is that homogeneity can lead to perfectionism and a fear of being different, and a fear of being an outsider and not being accepted. And something, I think we've all heard this, and I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about the perfectionism in our communities. I think I once had a colleague who told me that she had a woman come in and say, "You don't understand. My neighbor, she's perfect. Her kids, they never cry. All I hear is piano lessons and singing and happiness from their home. And I hear my kids crying and fighting. Our home is just not as happy. And she's a size 4 and she always looks so good and everything's perfect. And this is true." And then the next hour, who do you think came into her office? The neighbor. And the neighbor said, "I have this neighbor and she looks so perfect. And, my life isn't together and her life is so together." And, the therapist who was telling me this, laughed and said, "You never really know what's going on." And I'm wondering if we could talk about this perfectionism in a couple of ways. One is obviously, I think a lot of people thought about weddings and smachot and how much they liked the COVID weddings because.
Wow. Did that go on in America too? In Israel, it was an amazing phenomenon.
There was a sigh. I heard a sigh of relief, like, "Oh, I won't have to invite 500 of my best friends, 500 best friends and take a mortgage out to pay for a wedding that I'm not going to even enjoy." So I did hear a lot of relief about that. But I'm wondering if we could think about perfectionism in terms of our children. When we guide them, are we guiding them because what's right for them? Do we push them in the appropriate way? Some kids should be pushed, but some kids, maybe they're okay getting B's and being on the baseball team and playing soccer and having a great time. When are we pushing in the right ways? Are we listening to what they want? Or is there this, I feel like we have to balance this value of perfectionism on one hand and really listening to what's going on in ourselves, in our families, and in our kids. And it's a really big, I think it's a tension. We think about smachot, we think about our kids, and we think about, I think, even how do we help our kids date? Someone wants to be size 2. How do we help them? How do we help them balance the idea of how do we balance the perfectionism versus listening to ourselves and what we want and what's good for ourselves?
So let me ask you: do you recognize perfectionism as a major accomplice in problems that show up in your work?
I think it shows up. I do. Not so much only in the community, but this I do. And feeling bad and feeling left out, feeling not as popular, feeling not part. And yes, I see it as an issue.
So how do you approach it? Well, I'll tell you this. I had this. Okay, this is not from a halachic point of view. Okay,
Yeah.
Just a relative where this kid was doing a wonderful student throughout high school. Then he goes to one of these Ivy League universities, and the first semester comes and goes, and they feel that something's going terribly wrong. And there's a meeting in Israel. This would never happen because students, by the time they get to university, they're 25 years old and paying their own tuition. But there was a meeting between the father, the son, and the dean, and they were discussing what's going on. And the dean says, "I see this every day. I call it the 3 Ps. It's perfectionism, procrastination, paralysis." And that's a phenomenon, usually it's a story that happened in my family, but I usually use it on the month of Elul when we talk about tshuva and about bettering ourselves and about compassion and about not, often when you go into the mood of tshuva, it's the most paralyzing thing on earth because we don't experience it like the gift that it is, an opportunity of compassion, of not being perfect, just being a little bit better, and we actually turn it into another opportunity to beat ourselves up and to go and to go close and hurt and only damage ourselves more. So that's where I use it. But
I think what you're saying is so important. Almost that inner dialogue and that compassion of being able to talk to yourself, and slow down. I think sometimes our anxiety goes up. You go to a simcha, or you look at someone else's kids, or you go to shul, something triggers us. And it's important then to slow down and to say, okay, I have this feeling. Can I have a little bit of an inner dialogue of being kind to myself and saying, I'm doing okay, actually. I'm actually living the life I want. And I think it's really important to have goals of our own, to make sure that we have our own goals and to say, stay in our lane. We're driving in one lane, and to stay in our lane and to say, I might get triggered. I might feel something. And can I have that dialogue and say, I'm actually doing okay. I always think it's important to go back and say, do you have your own goals? And what do you want from your life? And when we're, studies show and research shows when we're trying to achieve some goals, that's when we, feel happy, when we're on that path. You look like you have something to say.
No, I'm listening.
Oh, so I think that's really important, to really shift back and forth and have that inner dialogue and say, yes, something looks perfect, but also to remind ourselves we never know what's really going on in someone else's life. And also to say that we're doing okay and to be kind, to have that, the same chesed we would show a friend who came over to us and said, I feel a little down. Can we show that to ourselves? Can we show ourselves some compassion and have that dialogue and say, and have that inner dialogue? I think that's really important. And sometimes it's imagery. Can we picture it? Can we feel it? Can we look at our lives and slow down? I think a big piece is slowing down. We might get triggered and then say, slow down and say, what am I really feeling? Maybe my life is okay. Maybe I'm doing okay. And sometimes we need feedback from people. Sometimes it can't just be, it can't just be we talk to ourselves. Sometimes we need feedback. Sometimes the feedback is really important from other people, and that we need to have people in our lives that are good mirrors that reflect that to us, and we'll say, you're doing okay.
Do you feel that someone who's in the loop of perfectionism, nothing's enough, could actually say to themselves, well, I'm doing okay, or life isn't that. Do you find that they're capable of doing that?
That's a good question. Probably not, and that's when you kind of need an outside voice. Um, that's that's when you need an outside voice, or to be honest, that's what I mean by slowing down. If they can reflect deeper, sometimes they can get out of that loop. And I think it's important that we um, go deeper and always try to really understand what are we feeling? What is it that I'm really feeling? Do I feel that I'm not a size 2? Do I feel that I won't get married? What is it that I'm really feeling? I think if we can get to the root of the real feeling, I think we'll lower anxiety and we can get out of that loop a little bit and sit with it. And it might be an uncomfortable feeling, but I do think that we can get out of it, because ultimately what pulls us to perfectionism is really fear and shame of being rejected or not being included. And if, on the other hand, I want to say, if we slow down and we sit and really reflect, maybe we won't be motivated just by the fear and shame. Maybe we'll be motivated by what we want to achieve in our lifetime, and what lane we want to stay in, and what we want to accomplish. So I feel like there's that tension. And the deeper we go, and sometimes you need a therapist, sometimes you need a friend to help you do it, sometimes you just need time. But the deeper we go, I think that we're able to break it.
It's interesting because from the spiritual side of it, like in religious language, like you would hear Baal Shem Tov say, these guilt trips are not leading you anywhere, and that perfectionism is a sort of Amalek, a specialized kind of Yetzer Hara. And then sometimes you have to hear things in double voices, because again, from someone that comes from a religious language or a spiritual language, they would say, what religion is pushing me to do, what Torah wants me to do is my very best, is the highest standards. And this whole talk about being compassionate with yourself is just wishy-washy people that aren't pushing themselves to the top level of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is expecting you to. And
I want to interject one thing, though. That's a great point. What HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants versus what other people want from us.
Okay. No, that's true. That definitely, and what we reflect within ourselves from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and from other people, But absolutely. But even in the sense of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us, there are these different mitzvot that the verse ends with the words Ani Hashem or Anochi Hashem, and usually these are mitzvot where you have to be intellectually honest to know that you're actually doing the right thing. It's as if when say lo telech achil be'amecha, lo tamod al dam re'echa, ani Hashem. So it says you have to watch what you say, and on the other hand, you have to be involved with your fellow Jews, whatever. And there's a very, very delicate balance there. When you can start questioning yourself. Did I do the right thing? Did I not do the right thing? And in the end of that verse, you get Ani Hashem. Okay, what's that Ani Hashem? So the simple understanding is, or a very true understanding is, you're not alone in the world, in that room or in that dilemma, in the sense that I'm watching. Keep your standards high. You have to be perfectly honest. You have to be, there is this divine pair of eyes watching you, and that's all true. But then you should go back to the pasuk and read it again, and say, okay, the dilemma, Ani Hashem, and it appears many times. And in that sense, it's Ani Hashem saying, you're not alone in this dilemma. I'm with you. I have your back. I trust you. I believe in you. And again, it's, you can say you're not alone, and this terrifying voice of saying nothing will be good enough. And you can say you're not alone, and you're being kept, you're being held. So the word compassionate is not just some kind of trying to lower standards. It's a way of approaching things that says, how do you think Ribono Shel Olam looks at you? Okay, who do you think? You know, you're flesh and blood. We all know that, and you're not alone in this story. So I think a lot of it's interesting because we're talking about these things on a psychological level, like as far as mental health, on a social level, as far as how we interact with other people, and on a spiritual level of how do you perceive your existence? Where do you set your standards and your goals, like you said?
So I think what you said is beautiful, like spot on. And I think you captured one of the biggest conflicts between the Torah perspective, on one hand, of saying always strive, always keep working. Every hour has to be. What do you mean vacation? What do you mean break? Every hour has to be accounted for. And on the other hand, this mental health perspective of show compassion. So I love what you said about Dani Hashem. And if we take that, maybe we could make some kind of, as you would say, a shiluf, some kind of understanding together, some kind of balance, and say, Hashem does have compassion for us, and maybe we want to mirror that. We want to mirror God's compassion for us, and how we look at ourselves. So it's not about not having high standards. I think we should have. I don't think psychology would say not to have high standards. It's really not a conflict, is what I'm trying to say. That it's not about not having high standards. It's about having compassion for when we have lows, compassion for when we make mistakes. It's not an excuse not to have high standards. It's a way of saying when we mess up, or when we slip up, or when we have lows, or when we have depression, when we have anxiety, can we be kind to ourselves then? So I really love that, Ani Hashem, and to say that, can we mirror that? Where's the compassion? Not about not having high expectations. We should have high expectations. Aim high. Anyone, will tell you, the harder we work, the happier we are. But can we have compassion when we're struggling? We need that compassion and empathy for ourselves and others, and that lets us get up again and try harder and work harder and get back on. It lets us do everything that God demands of us and wants from us, having compassion. And I think if we don't have that voice of saying, I understand, I see your pain, I see your suffering, which is really what we want God to do, I think that we miss out in some way.
Yeah, I'm very tempted to say something like a little Dvar Torah. Do you have patience for that?
For sure. Thank you.
There's this very famous midrash that when Yosef was about to sin with Eshet Potiphar, he walks into a room. He already decided that it's going to happen, and then suddenly he sees Dmut Yokan Aviv B'chalon. He sees this image of his father, of Yaakov. Actually, the Yerushalmi says Yaakov and Rachel, and we're watching him. And you can imagine the shock, like the last thing you would expect is seeing your parent. And then you start to think, what's in that look? What's in that gaze? Okay, so he saw their eyes, their face, their eyes met, and what did he see in that eyes that shocked him so that he didn't continue with his plan that was probably very attractive? And the first thoughts we have are scrutiny and criticism and disappointment and all these, how could you do this? Is this what I raised you for, etc. And then you remember it's Yaakov and the relationship between Yaakov and Yosef, and that's where all the trouble began, because he was so utterly in love with this special son of his. And you understand that, of course, all that, high standard was all there, but that look was also a parental look. And it said, I'm with you. I trust you. You can do this. You're better than this, but not you're better than this in this very critical way, but I know who you really are, what you really worth, and like having his back in that sense. You can do this. You can stand this. You can win this dilemma, and this issue of experiencing it, not only as scrutiny and disappointment, but also as a trusting, loving parent. That's a whole different story.
I love that.
And then it goes even further. There's Rav Chaim Sabato, in one of his books, he brings this vote. After you hear it once, you don't forget it. So if you heard it, that Yosef was traveling around the world, and he, not as a world traveler, but just, in the slums. And he didn't notice himself growing up and growing a beard and changing and becoming an adult, a man. And on the other hand, he also never saw these fancy rooms and fancy houses. And for the first time, he walks into Eshet Potiphar's room, and in a second there, he sees that image of his father. But what it actually was Potiphar's wife had a mirror, but Yosef never saw a mirror in his life. So suddenly he sees himself, actually, but he looks just like Yaakov after all these years, because he's all grown up, and he sees Yaakov, and whatever. That's a nice vote, but what's actually going on there? It's not only the scrutiny, the standards, etc. It's not only the parental gaze saying you can do it, I am with you, I trust you. It's also the way you look at yourself. And the gaze there, it's like, Simba looking in Lion King, looking at this puddle and actually realizing, who am I? So all of this goes on in the way we reflect about ourselves, and that's exactly what you said before. I'm sorry, I couldn't help it.
This is 6 in the morning. I think we should let's try 4 in the morning. I mean, this is amazing. You're shifting and talking about, we're talking about parent-child relationships right now. Right. About Yaakov and Yosef.
Right.
Let's go there. You interact with so many young people, and what do you see as strengths of parenting this generation, and what are some of the challenges and things that you see missing?
No, you didn't really. That's such a formatted question. I need to now, read an article and give you some.
Kind of threw out our script, so
Yeah. Oh, wow. I really need to think about it. So tell me what some of your thoughts, and I'll play along with you.
Okay. That's not fair, but
yeah. It's just you and me here,
It's true. No one else is here. I could go for 2 more hours. I think one thing that I think is a big deal is I think parents these days are communicating better with their students. I think a lot better communication. I think there's an emphasis on listening and on hearing. I think that wasn't there 20 years ago. That wasn't there 40 years ago. There's more focus on spending good family time together and really communicating, not just spending time. I always will tell clients that they might have been together during COVID under every lockdown, 24 hours together, but it doesn't mean that they were really communicating. Just because you're in the same house doesn't mean you're really communicating. And it's so important. It's so important to really sit and check in. Say, how are you doing? You might have been home on Zoom all day, but I wanted to check in and see, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? So I think there's a lot more communication. Something that I'm seeing a lot of parents just having anxiety. Are parents going to be okay? Are kids going to be okay? And then that gets passed on to kids. Am I okay? Am I going to be okay? My parents are worried about me in school or on the fields or in life. And I think that there's a tremendous amount of anxiety that might come from wanting to protect, might come from just caring a lot. But on the strength, I see much better communication and willing to hear, I feel different about this, guys, and it's hard, but there's better communication for sure. There's also a lot more anxiety.
So let me ask you about the communication, okay? Do you know this phenomenon when there's someone new in your in your social circles? So in the beginning, you can ask them what their name is. Okay. But if you somehow miss that out in the first few opportunities, you can never ask their name again because it's too embarrassing, right? So there's a difference between someone that has the habit of interviewing their children, not in a threatening way, but I'm saying making them talk, someone who's in the habit of communicating, or the family you just described that spent tons of time together in Corona, but never really opened up real questions, or I'll even say some of the children tend to be very talkative and open, and then you open up with them very deep conversations. And the others, it's like you missed the right time to ask what their name is. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like the habit isn't there, and there's a certain there's a pattern already set. And how do you start that? How do you break that dynamic?
That's a great question. I think it might be over, the medium is the message, I like to say. So you might say that I'm going to start playing board games with my kids because it's a great way to start talking, or I'm going to start cooking. Sometimes you just want to be doing something together. And that's important, and that it leads to conversations. And sometimes it's okay to say, I've never asked you about school. How's school going? I always assume it's okay. And to sort of acknowledge that I'm starting a new thing. I wanted to know how things are. And again, not to, and I think the same you have to do if you miss someone's name. You might go over and say, I'm so sorry. I forgot your name. Can you tell me your name? You might want to say that to your kids. Like, you know what? Like, I don't know how your year was, and I don't know how camp was. Can we go out and especially put away technology? Shabbos is a great time. I just want to know, did you like that? Did you like your new tennis teacher? Did you like that chavruta? How's high school really for you? And really go into it. And sometimes that means being vulnerable as a parent and not saying I have all the answers, and not saying that, oh, I do everything perfectly. It's saying, hey, I messed up. I'm sorry. But to think of that as like, oh, I can't go back there is still such a loss. I want to say a loss for the kids, but even a bigger loss for the parents, and for the relationship. And we make mistakes. So get up and say, I'm vulnerable. I made a mistake. Okay.
And also these children are sometimes in their 20s. It's sometimes the patterns go deep.
Yes. And I say it's never too late. To say it's never too late to say, why don't we make it a thing and we go out for lunch? Why don't we make it a thing and we'll go take walk? It's never too late. And I want to say that your relationships with adult children can be so such a joy, and it's never too late. And to say, well, I never asked her name. I'm not going to ask her name. Say, oops, I never asked her name. And that I see that so much in my practice. I know we only have a couple minutes. Okay, two last things.
Yeah,
try to get it all. We're not going to get it all in here. And we also see a lot of my clients. They spent a lot of time together, and for some, their marriage is improved. They're like, we got to know each other better. There was no one else to spend time with anyway. We like each other, but sometimes there was a lot of disconnect. Is there anything you would say to couples? Same way we said about kids. What's the disconnect? What are strengths in some of the marriages, and what are some challenges you see? And then 30 seconds for that, and maybe 30 seconds for what's your last message to everyone.
As far as marriages, over the last year, we've seen everything, because what most overall happened was things became more extreme. Some things were good, but not great. But the good couples, struggled what were okay, and the problems became very extreme. To extent of violence and divorces and a lot of difficulty. We were, definitely as a yotzot halacha, or people dealing with people, we saw many extremes. I might say, don't tell anybody, but some of these cases, I'm actually relieved that things, if things shouldn't have stayed hidden or undealt with, or even a marriage, sometimes it's sad, but has to end. That is an option, and mostly. And again, I don't come from a therapeutic point of view. Okay, mostly I found that people cherished what they have. And some of the time they were walking up the walls, and they were in seclusion, and they were really going crazy in many ways. But most of the time, the people I met, except for the extreme problems, said, "Wow, but I'm in my home with my family. I'm able to protect them. It's like, again, I don't mean to bring a sober mood in, but often when you speak to people that lost someone dear, and I think this is a quote from Brene Brown. I heard her say, I asked all these people, how can we create a compassionate place for you? And they said, when we see that you appreciate what you have, we feel that you respect what we lost. And for many people, I felt that was the big deal, that people said, okay, it's a little bit too crazy, it's a little bit too crowded, but wow, I'm here with my kids, I'm here with my family. We're as healthy as can be in such a pandemic. And even being able to stop and cherish and stop and appreciate. I know in the therapeutic field, problems have to be worked out, and different ways of dealing with problems have to be acknowledged. But also from my, maybe a spiritual point of view, it's so much about gratitude, about cherishing what you have, about realizing that these are treasures that, we're going to miss, even just through growing up. And what a tremendous gift it is. That's my point of view.
I think what you said is, to tie it together to what you said to the Ani Hashem. I think that what I saw with couples is that even if they spent all this time together, people really want to be seen. People really want to be seen for who they are. And that means they have to be vulnerable and share with their partner and be seen. And, studies show whatever mode of therapy, you could do CBT, DBT, Freud, anything, take it or leave it. What are the most important factors is that if you felt that your therapist saw you for who you were and really understood your pain and your strengths, not just the pain and the strengths. And I think that, one message maybe for couples is to say that, I see so many couples and they do so many practical things for their partners. And really a lot of people just want to, really share on a deeper level, and that takes time. That intimacy, really, really takes time, I think to develop. I think there's so many more things to discuss. And is there a last thought that you want to share?
Yeah. I'm just noticing there's the motive of eyes that goes through what it was the way we view the world looking at us, the way we view HaKadosh Baruch Hu compassionately looking at us, the way we view ourselves, the way we mirror into our soul, and like you just said, being able to see someone else for who he is, for what he is, and actually, using it not only in the sphere of me, the society there, but also within our relationship. So I see a serious motive there.
Yes, I love that. Ani Hashem, to say, can we see ourselves in a compassionate way? Can we see others in a compassionate way? I love that. I love that.
Yep.
I really love that. It's beautiful, and that allows for resilience. To see our strengths and to we've gotten through a lot of trauma with, and everyone has resilience. If everyone looks back on this year, even hard parts, they can think back to something they did and say, I didn't think I could do it. I did it, and I think.
Sure. I mean, globally, we could say we never imagined we'd go through this. And on an individual level, we each have, if we think of it, 10 examples of things we couldn't imagine we could do. And here we are. So, nice.
Ellie, it's such a treat to hear your reflections and your thoughts, and to talk about the intersection between mental health and spirituality, halacha, and to see where it's separate and where it's similar. So it's always good to talk to you.
Yefeh. And this week we mostly say besorot tovot.
Amen.
Okay.
Bye.